Hello, welcome to my TMEA 2021 masterclass, this time online. My goal with these series of videos, which are going to be posted on YouTube, is to divide the etudes down to smaller chunks. The benefit that I have found teaching these etudes over years with chunking them down into smaller pieces is that the students usually have a better understanding of the phrases of the etudes, and if you do have a better understanding, your breathing will fall in the correct place much easier. And also, once you bring the etudes up to speed, you won't have as much trouble playing them and putting these phrases together. Imagine each one of these phrases are like pieces of a bigger Lego construction. Once we have every piece in place, we can put together everything and we have the final product. Okay, with the Karg-Elert, I have divided the etude into 28 sections that I will walk you through each one of these sections. Some of them are a measure long, some of them might be half a measure, and some of them might be 2 measures. I have tried my best to just chunk down the etudes into meaningful musical tiny phrases that you can practice over and over with metronome and make sure that you are really polishing up each tiny phrase. Okay, the first phrase is going to be our first measure, which reads forte, grave, il suono. So we want to pick our best sound to really make a good impression on the judges for this measure. And then the second phrase is going to be the second measure all the way to that 8th note on the 4th beat. The third phrase is going to start at the end of the second measure and go all the way to the end of the line. Make sure that you have a pencil in your hand and you are following this video, and you can pause anytime you want, and you put down the lines or brackets in order to exactly know which one of these phrases we are talking about. The fourth phrase is going to be the first measure of the second line, which happens to be measure number 4. So far we have had 4 phrases beginning from measure 1, number 2, number 3, and this is phrase number 5. Phrase number 6, which is a different dynamic, and our goal is to really bring out these dynamics, as much contrast as you can get. Number 7. This was number 8. And number 9 is going to be measure 7, all of the measure 7. And the 10th phrase is the last measure of the 3rd line, which is our measure number 8. Okay, so the way you should practice each one of these phrases, first of all, obviously is very slow. Make sure that your tone is the best you can do. Really put a lot of effort to get the best sound that you can produce with your instrument. Then after that, maybe start somewhere half tempo or like 1/3 of the suggested tempo, which happens to be very fast, and then get the phrases most of the time have a lot of 16th note in them, very even. So you can put your metronome somewhere around, let's say like 56. And for this example, I'm going to use phrase number 9. playing that, maybe play it 5 or 10 times, or maybe have a rule for yourself of being able to repeat the phrase 5 or 10 times before you're allowed to go on a higher metronome marking. All right, let's keep going. Phrase number 11 is the whole measure 9. You can put the line at the end of measure 9. Phrase number 12 is going to be all of measure 10. This is phrase number 13. After you have learned this measure, we want to bring out the dynamic contrast the composer has indicated. So it would be a good idea to practice phrase number 13 on 4 small, tiny, different chunks and do as much dynamic as you possibly can. So once you're performing this up to tempo, you can really bring out the dynamic contrast that is supposed to happen in this measure. And eventually you can bring it up to tempo. Alright, the next phrase is going to be phrase number 14, and I have picked the first half of measure 12 for phrase number 14. And the rest of the measure is phrase number 15. Make sure that you remember, if you decide to put the phrase for the whole measure, that's totally fine. These are what I personally have thought might be the most efficient way of practicing this etude, alright? But the whole idea of putting down brackets and lines and really dividing the etude into tiny little musical chunks instead of like tiny measures is what I'm aiming with these series of videos. Okay. Phrase number 16 is going to be all of measure 13. One more time. This is phrase number 17. Phrase number 18. One of the benefits of practicing like this is that you can really pinpoint where the problem is. For example, when I was preparing this etude, measure number 15 gave me a lot of trouble as far as articulation. So I separated that, and every time that I was warming my instrument every morning, I just went really slowly. And eventually, after a few days, I started to increase the tempo. Alright, so I shifted my attention from technique to tone, or something like, for example, vibrato, and eventually, after I got a good grasp on the changes and the articulation and the notes, I started bringing back my attention to technique, which turned the phrase number 18, which is measure 15, into a faster chunk of music. Just like that. Okay, measure 16 all the way to the double dotted B flat will be our next phrase. And the reason that I have separated the last 16 notes on measure 16 is that I do want you guys to take the breath right before that 16th note. Alright, and that will create some sort of a connection musically in order to go forward with your etude. Alright, one mistake that you might be prone to making is to play these double dotted quarter notes almost like a double dotted eighth note. So put your metronomes and follow along with me. So each one of these double dotted quarter notes are almost 2 beats. Make sure that you don't forget that in the context of the etude, because it's easy to go. That might happen very easily. Okay, so far we have had 19 phrases. Phrase number 20 starts with this last 16th note of measure 16 and goes all the way to the end of measure 17. Sorry, measure 18. So this is phrase number 20. This is phrase number 21. Phrase number 22. Phrase number 23. So far, measure 21 was our phrase number 23. Measure 22 was our phrase number 24. Measure 23 was our phrase number 25. Alright? And just like measure 11, I do want you to really break down measure 23 into 4 small chunks and really exaggerate all of those dynamics in this measure. The next phrase is going to be phrase number 26, and it starts with the beginning of measure 24 until the very last 16 note. I do want to include the very last 16 note in our next phrase. So it goes. And with our next phrase, which is number 27, we want to really make sure that each one of these intervals are perfectly in tune. Alright, so just like the other measure that I indicated earlier, I started practicing this every morning or every time that I wanted to warm up my instrument as a warm-up. And eventually I started getting a better grasp of it technically, and I really learned what should I do as far as embouchure and intonation and all of those things, so it sounds even in tone and also in tune. Alright, this was phrase number 27, and our last phrase is going to be in a different video. I will try to break down the harder spots on, in this etude, and also maybe provide some other information as far as how the trills go, or how some of the trickier spots can be played easier if you practice it the right way. Alright.